Hey there, sleepyheads. Welcome back to the channel. Before we drift into 2 hours of real alien abduction stories that still can't be explained, Sleep Edition, I've got a little question for you. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? And more importantly, what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches, from midnight coffee sippers to 4 a.m. stargazers and brave souls who somehow think alien abductions make good bedtime stories. Respect. All right, lights low, blankets up, and tinfoil hats optional. Let's begin. Let's begin with one of the most famous and spine-tingling cases in alien lore. And no, this one wasn't made up by your uncle after 3 cups of espresso and a fuzzy memory. It was a cool September night in 1961. Betty and Barney Hill, a perfectly ordinary couple, were driving down a dark, winding road in New Hampshire after a vacation in Canada. Just your standard, let's not stop until we see our own mailbox type of drive. The stars above them were clear. The radio hummed. All was well, until it wasn't. Off in the sky, Betty spotted something. A light, moving in odd, jerky patterns. Not a plane, not a star, not a firefly with ambition. Something different. Barney, the ever-practical type, was like, Betty, it's probably just a plane. Spoiler, it was not a plane. The light began following them, getting closer, hovering, watching. They pulled over. Barney got out, because every sci-fi movie ever has taught us that when something mysterious is chasing you, the best thing to do is to get out of the car and walk directly towards it. He had binoculars. He looked. And what he saw, a large, silent, disc-shaped craft with beings inside. Not birds, not reflections, figures looking at him. Barney ran back to the car and said, quote, "They're going to capture us." So, obviously, they sped off. But then, a loud buzzing sound. Their car jolted. Everything went fuzzy. The next thing they knew, they were 35 miles down the road. And 2 hours had passed. Just gone. Like they'd been fast-forwarded in time. Which honestly would be helpful during long Zoom meetings, but terrifying on a road trip. They got home feeling disoriented with vague memories of pressure, strange dreams, and Betty's dress torn and stained with something she couldn't identify. Yes, it was tested later, no explanation found. And here's where things go full X-Files. Weeks later, they started having nightmares. Barney described being taken into a metallic room, placed on a table, and examined by small beings with large heads and dark, slanted eyes. Betty remembered a star map shown to her by one of the entities, a layout of where they said they were from. This is the part where the chills start to set in, but gently, don't worry. Under hypnosis, they separately told eerily similar stories. They didn't even want fame, in fact. Their story only went public after it was leaked. Not exactly the move of attention seekers. Later, an amateur astronomer tried to match Betty's sketch of that star map to real constellations, and shockingly, it matched a view of the Zeta Reticuli system, as seen from space, not from Earth. Let that one tuck you in for a minute. Skeptics, of course, had their say. They suggested stress, dreams, or some kind of shared hallucination, which, to be honest, it would be just as scary. But the Hills story remains one of the most thoroughly investigated, consistent, and emotionally raw abduction cases in modern history, and it's never been fully explained. Just 2 regular people, a quiet road, and a night they could never quite get back. Now, take a breath. We're just getting started. The next story, it involves a logger, a flash of light, and 5 missing days in the Arizona woods. But don't worry, it's told softly enough that if the aliens are listening, maybe they'll take the hint and wait until morning. So let's rewind to 1976. 2 friends, Betty and Jean, were cruising through the deserted backroads of Mississippi after a laid-back weekend in Mobile, Alabama. Picture this. The sky is a pitch-dark canvas. No streetlights, no headlights behind them. Just endless road. Maybe a moth or 2, playing tag with the windshield. They're deep in conversation, probably about something harmless, like boys, work, or how the gas station coffee tasted. Suspiciously like hot driveway water, when suddenly, bam, a blinding light lights up the road ahead. No warning, no build-up, just, hello, your pupils are now fried eggs. Naturally, they assumed it was a helicopter, or a cop, or maybe one of those really aggressive streetlights with control issues. But no, this thing wasn't coming from the ground. It was hovering, silent, watching. a large glowing craft shaped like an inverted bowl, just floating above the road. No sound, no wind, just chilling up there like it paid rent. They did what any rational person would do. They slammed on the brakes and got out to take a better look because, of course, standing directly under mysterious, glowing objects is how all good sleep stories begin. Now here's where things get real strange, and I mean, you won't find this in a road safety manual strain. The next thing they remember, they're 20 miles down the road with no clue how they got there. And the kicker? An hour had passed. Poof, gone. Just like that. No memory. No signal. Just a giant hole in the timeline. They looked at each other like two players in a board game who skipped 5 turns and didn't roll the dice. Their watches were off. Their snacks were untouched. The real tragedy. And they both had this eerie, identical feeling in their gut, like their brains had been to a party they weren't invited to. Now here's where the mystery deepened. Back at home, they started experiencing weird dreams. Same dreams. Flashing lights, cold metal tables, strange figures with elongated limbs and big bug-like eyes. Voices in their heads, but no mouths moving. One of them described it like being watched by something that wasn't blinking. And let's be honest, blinking is really the bare minimum of comfort when you're around strangers, right? Eventually, they sought hypnotic regression therapy, which for those new to the concept is basically memory excavation with gentle jazz music and a very patient therapist. And under hypnosis, their stories matched almost perfectly, being taken from the car, floated, not walked. Inside a glowing room where they were examined not painfully, but methodically by beings that didn't feel cruel. Just curious, like researchers poking at jellyfish and wondering how we function with such squishy bits. Neither woman had told the other what she saw before the sessions. Yet the details aligned, including descriptions of a room with no corners and lights that pulsed like breathing walls. Creepy, yes. Comforting? Nope. Snack-worthy? Still no. Don't lose time and snacks. Their story was picked up by local papers, then national ones. And soon they became part of a growing number of ordinary people reporting these bizarre missing time experiences. Now, skeptics will say it was highway hypnosis, or they fell asleep at the wheel, which, sure, that happens. But both of them at the exact same time, with identical, spontaneous memories of strange beings under hypnosis. That's a long way from, oops, we napped through Mississippi. So, what do we make of it? Either something is messing with our time perception in very remote places, or the universe just gets real nosy once in a while. And if you're driving late at night and a glowing bowl starts hovering in front of your car, maybe take a detour. Preferably one with cell signal and a gas station that sells alien repellent. Just kidding, sort of. All right, sleepy explorers. Grab a warm drink, hug your pillow, and let's drift into one of the most talked about, and frankly, weirdly, well-documented alien abduction cases ever. This one happened in 1975 in a sleepy Arizona town with more trees than people and more squirrels than both. But to the man of the hour, Travis Walton, a 22-year-old logger who, by all accounts, was a hard-working, no-nonsense guy. The type of guy who'd wrestle a chainsaw and still be home in time for stew. He was part of a 7-man crew cutting timber in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest, which, if you haven't been, is just endless green. And the occasional, did you hear that? Moment. Now, here's the moment where it all tips into X-Files territory. It's late afternoon. The crew wraps up and piles into their pickup truck, heading home down a bumpy dirt road. It's already starting to get dark. The sky doing that soft purple fade that says weird things are about to happen. Suddenly, wham! A bright light slices through the trees. Hovering above a clearing is a large, glowing disk. And this isn't your classic blurry UFO footage kind of sighting. This is up close, retina-scorching, holy pine cones Batman kind of sighting. Now, most people would floor the gas and be halfway to Texas by now. But not Travis. Travis, bless him, gets out of the truck. Because curiosity, apparently, is stronger than self-preservation. He walks right into the clearing. The rest of the crew watches from the truck, probably whispering things like, is he serious right now? And I'm not going after him, you go. And then it happens. A beam of light shoots out from the craft. and hits Travis square in the chest. He's lifted off the ground, like levitating. Limbs limp, floating in midair like a puppet with its strings yanked by a very confused cosmic cat. Then, poof, he's thrown back like a rag doll. Hits the ground hard. The crew? They panic. They slam the gas and speed off down the road, screaming, hyperventilating, probably promising to never speak of this again if they survive the night. But a few minutes in, guilt hits. They turn around. They go back for Travis. Only Travis is gone. Completely. No body, no blood, no footprints. Just that eerie clearing. And a smell in the air one of the guys described as like electricity and burnt pine. Now cue the madness. They report it to the police. Search teams scour the forest. Helicopters fly over. Dogs sniff everything but each other. 5 days pass. And Travis suddenly reappears on the side of a road, disoriented, dehydrated, and deeply confused, wearing the exact same clothes like he stepped out of time itself. He stumbles into a phone booth, remember those? And calls his brother. First thing he says, "They're gone. I'm back, come get me." What happened during those 5 days? Under hypnosis, and in later interviews, Travis describes waking up in a small metallic room. 3 short beings with huge heads and black eyes stared down at him. No pain, but lots of pressure. He said it felt like he was underwater, like his body was there, but he wasn't driving it. They touched his face, studied him. He panicked, ran. Eventually, he found himself in another room, this time with human-looking figures, oddly calm, wearing strange, tight suits. They didn't talk, didn't blink, just guided him back into unconsciousness. And then he woke up on Earth, with a beard that hadn't grown a single whisker longer. Time, a flat circle. Now, here's the wild part. The 6 other men on his crew all passed lie detector tests, multiple times. They told the same story under police questioning, under hypnosis, and even under public scrutiny. Skeptics tried everything. Drugs, hoax, hallucination, but no one's ever cracked the mystery. Travis even took multiple polygraphs, brain scans, and psychological evaluations. He came out of it all shaken but consistent. It became a national story, a book, a film called Fire in the Sky, which, by the way, is terrifyingly inaccurate in the actual abduction scenes. According to Travis himself, apparently Hollywood made it way scarier for the popcorn crowd. But Travis, he stuck to his story for decades, never profited from it, never changed it. Just quietly kept living in the same town, chopping wood and avoiding bright lights. Now let's slow things down. Just a touch. Stretch your toes under the blanket. Take a deep breath and picture yourself in those quiet Arizona woods again. The birds have stopped chirping. The wind feels paused. And somewhere in those trees, something utterly strange just happened. After Travis returned, the town of Snowflake, Arizona went from peaceful and pine-scented to national headline chaos. Reporters swarmed. UFO hunters rolled in with camera gear and Geiger counters. Even skeptics who normally scoffed at alien tales started doing double takes. Because again, 7 men, same exact story. No cracks, no contradictions, and nothing to gain. The polygraph tests, you ask? Let's talk about that for a second. The first round was conducted just days after Travis vanished. 6 out of the 7 loggers passed. One result was inconclusive, but not deceptive. Now, let's be real. Lie detectors aren't perfect, but 6 grown men holding tight to a story this bizarre, under that level of scrutiny. That's harder than keeping a New Year's resolution past January 3rd. Then there's Travis himself. He didn't exactly ride the fame train. For years after his return, he dealt with health issues, headaches, insomnia, night sweats. And while Hollywood twisted his story into nightmare fuel, he always stayed calm and consistent in interviews. He described the inside of the ship as clean, clinical. The beings weren't monstrous. They were methodical. He remembered feeling like he was being examined, but not tortured, more like observed, like a deer on a vet's table. Oddly enough, Travis said the human-like figures were the ones that unsettled him the most. Think about that. Big-eyed aliens, kind of okay. Weirdly perfect, silent humanoids, nope. He said their calmness felt unnatural, like mannequins that blink. Some researchers believe Travis may have been passed between 2 different species. Others suggest screen memories, where the mind protects itself from trauma by altering how it remembers the event. And here's where things get even more Twilight Zone. Travis described floating holographic displays, a room with controls he couldn't understand, and a sensation of missing time, even inside the craft. Like hours or minutes, didn't matter. Everything just was. Now, for skeptics, there's always a bucket of cold water. They'll say it was a hoax, a shared hallucination, or an elaborate way to skip work and get a movie deal. But if that's true, why not crack under pressure? Why not cash in early and often? Instead, Travis lived humbly, quietly, gave talks only when asked. He even took more lie detector tests years later, and passed every single one. Try lying about anything for 40-plus years and keeping it straight. You can't even remember what you ate for lunch on Monday. This case became a gold standard in ufology. It wasn't blurry lights in the sky. It was missing people, documented panic, and a man reappearing with a story too strange to invent and too consistent to ignore. To this day, when people talk about the most credible abduction stories, Travis Walton's name floats to the top, like cream on alien coffee. So next time you're driving through a quiet patch of forest and your headlights catch a glint in the sky, maybe just stay in the car, roll up the windows, and maybe don't go check it out unless you really, really like floating. All right, dreamer, your eye's getting heavy yet? Because up next is a tale that's less about grown-ups and more about kids. And these kids? They didn't just see something. They watched it together in broad daylight. And every one of them still says, it really happened. Now let's gently drift away from the pine forests of Arizona and float softly into the sunlit fields of Ruwa, Zimbabwe, in the year 1994. Yes, you heard right. We're in Africa now, under a wide blue sky, birds singing lazily and children running about in their recess. Break at a small private school called Ariel School. Sounds peaceful, right? The kind of scene that belongs in a coffee commercial. Well, hold on to your bedtime cocoa, because this quiet little corner of the world witnessed one of the most astonishing mass UFO sightings ever reported. 60 kids, ages 6 to 12. No phones, no cameras, just eyes wide open, jaws on the floor, and a story that still gives seasoned investigators goosebumps. It started on an ordinary morning. Teachers were in a meeting. Kids were outside, playing near the schoolyard's dusty edge, where the grass meets a bit of brush and thicket. And someone saw something, a silver object, glinting, hovering, descending. The kids froze. A few pointed. Some laughed. Some blinked a lot, hoping it was a prank or a trick of sunlight. But then came the second part, the part that would live in their memories forever. Because out of that shiny, saucer-like object stepped me, small, thin, with long limbs and huge black eyes. The kind you don't forget even if you want to. And here's the kicker. These kids didn't scream or run. They didn't even panic, not at first. Most of them just stood there, staring, mesmerized. It was like time had slowed, and something deeply strange had taken hold of the moment. One of the girls later said it felt like the figure was talking to her, but not out loud. She said it was like a message inside her head, a warning. About the planet, about how we're hurting it. Pause right there. We've all heard alien stories, sure. But how often does a group of children from different backgrounds and ages describe the same telepathic warning about Earth's future? They weren't coached. They didn't even talk to each other much at first. Many were too shaken. But when asked separately in their own words, they painted the same picture. Big black eyes. Skinny bodies, no sound, but thoughts sent directly into their minds. A feeling of deep worry about the environment. One boy said the being looked at him like it was searching his mind. Another girl said she saw a man in a black suit near the ship, only, he wasn't wearing the suit. He was the suit. Creepy, yeah. Dreamlike, totally. A hoax? Well, here's the twist. The teachers didn't believe it, at first. But the kids were so emotional, so certain, and so deeply affected. The school called in psychologists and even a famous Harvard professor, Dr. John Mack, a guy who'd made a career out of analyzing trauma and who, let's be honest, didn't come to believe alien tales lightly. He interviewed many of the children, and you could see it in their faces. Those weren't kids playing pretend. They were reliving something odd, something powerful. Even decades later, many of them have stuck by their stories. They've grown up now, scattered across the globe, but when asked, they don't laugh it off. They still remember those big, haunting eyes. They still remember the feeling that something not from here came close and tried to tell them something. All right, sleepyhead. Are your eyelids getting heavy yet? Because up next, we're going to swap the sunshine of Zimbabwe for the cold Canadian air, where a man vanished from his own backyard, only to be found miles away, with burns on his chest and a tale of glowing metal and unbearable heat. So, stay cozy. Stay curious. Now, you might be wondering, couldn't it just have been a group hallucination? A wild recess imagination moment powered by sunshine, sugar, and cartoons. Totally fair thought. But here's the thing. Try getting 60 children to stick to the same bizarre story for decades. It's like herding cats who've had too much chocolate milk. Over the years, skeptics came and went. Some claimed it was mass hysteria. Others said perhaps a weather balloon drifted down, or a prankster in a weird costume had too much fun that day. But when Dr. John Mack, yes, the Harvard guy again, interviewed the kids one by one, they didn't flinch. He wasn't looking for aliens. He was looking for psychological consistency, and he found it. Many of the children had that same distant stare adults often get when remembering a car crash or a powerful dream. You know the one, half here, half somewhere far away, like their minds still hadn't fully returned from that field in 1994. And remember, these weren't attention-hungry teenagers. Some of them were just 6 years old. One boy even tried to draw what he saw, big-headed beings, dark suits, and eyes the size of dinner plates. The kind of art that doesn't make it to the fridge because it makes Grandma uncomfortable. Now, what made this even more chilling was what came after. Some of the children reported recurring dreams for months. Dreams of floating, dreams of being watched. And here's the goosebump part. Several kids said they had never believed in aliens before that day. Now they couldn't stop thinking about them. Imagine being 8 years old and trying to fall asleep after that. No teddy bear's gonna protect you from the big-eyed beings of Ruwawa. And yet, there was no fear in many of the children's voices. Instead, there was curiosity. They wanted to understand. They wanted to know what it all meant. Even now, as adults, many of them speak about the experience with a kind of quiet reverence, as if they saw something they still don't have words for. One former student, now in her 30s, once said, "I don't care if people think I'm crazy. I know what I saw. It wasn't human, and it didn't mean us harm." Now that's spooky and comforting, like a haunted blanket that tucks you in. In 2020, a documentary crew followed up with several of these kids, now adults. And guess what? Same stories, same eerie details, same eyes that still widen when they talk about it. So what do we do with this? Do we say they lied? That their brains glitched at the exact same time? Or do we just, maybe, let our minds stay open? Because somewhere out there, under the African sun, 60 little minds were touched by something strange. Not terrifying, not violent, just alien, different. And maybe that's why the story still lingers. Like a song you heard once and can't forget. It doesn't scream for your attention. It whispers, "All right, let's tuck that one under the pillow of your thoughts and tiptoe into our next tale. We're heading to Canada, where a quiet prospector named Stefan just wanted to look for gold and ended up face to face with a metallic saucer so hot it burned his shirt clean off. Now, if you've ever wondered what happens when you touch an alien ship, you're about to find out. So fluff up those pillows, dim the lights a little more, and I'll meet you in the woods of Manitoba, where the trees don't just whisper secrets. They might be hiding them. All right, sleepyheads, adjust those pillows and let's head somewhere a little unexpected. No, not a remote forest, not a rural farm. Tonight, we're in the heart of Manhattan. Yep, skyscrapers, yellow taxis, pretzel carts, Broadway. The city that never sleeps. Except apparently when aliens drop by. Our story begins in 1989, just off Brooklyn Bridge. And, spoiler alert, this isn't your typical quiet country tale. No crickets, no barns, just glowing lights and one of the strangest traffic jams in UFO history. Meet Linda Napolitano, a quiet New Yorker with an even quieter apartment life. She wasn't into science fiction, didn't believe in aliens, probably had a favorite bagel spot and avoided Times Square like a true local. But on November 30th at around 3:15 a.m., Linda shot awake. Something was wrong. The air felt heavy and her room was glowing faintly blue. Not cop lights down the block blue. Not forgot to turn off the TV blue. No, a cold, pulsing blue, like someone was microwaving the sky. Linda couldn't move, couldn't scream. And as she stared at her bedroom window, which, by the way, was sealed shut 12 floors above the street, she saw 3 small figures floating outside. No wings, no wires, just hovering there, watching her. Now, I don't know about you, but if something is floating outside my 12th-story window in Manhattan, I'm either being pranked by Spider-Man, or it's time to rethink my evening tea. Then, it happened. Linda felt herself being pulled through the glass without it breaking. Just imagine. One moment you're in bed, cozy under your covers. Next moment you're levitating through a window like it's made of mist. Talk about a drafty night. Linda later described being aboard a metallic room filled with soft lights and strange instruments. The beings didn't talk. Not with mouths, but thoughts, telepathy, filled her head like whispered echoes. She remembered, lying on a table, light, heat, and the sensation of being scanned, like the universe itself was checking her barcode. Then, snap, she was back in her bed. It was morning. Her room looked normal, but her feet were dirty, as if she'd been walking barefoot through the streets of the city. Weird, right? Now here's where it gets wilder. You'd think it was just a dream, one of those surreal I fell asleep watching X-Files kind of deal, except multiple witnesses came forward. 2 bodyguards, allegedly from a political entourage driving across Brooklyn Bridge that very night, reported seeing a woman float out of a window enveloped in blue light and taken into a hovering craft. They didn't know Linda. They didn't even live nearby. But their story, it matched hers, down to the glowing figures and the silent ship. And these weren't your average conspiracy theorists. They were trained security professionals. One of them even had to go through therapy afterward, because the event shook him to his core. Now you may be wondering, why Manhattan? Why not someplace quieter with fewer traffic cameras and nosy neighbors? But maybe that's the point. Maybe whoever or whatever they are, they want to remind us that they can show up anywhere, even where the streetlights never go out, even where nobody's supposed to notice the stars. All right, let's pause here. Mid-air, if you will, and we'll float gently into the next part of Linda's mystery. Because the aftershocks of that night, they rippled for years. Threatening letters, mysterious visitors, missing time, and a tale so surreal, it had even skeptics scratching their heads between bites of their New York pizza. So go ahead, sip some water, shift your blanket, and get comfy. We've got 3,000 more characters of cozy mystery coming right up. Still with me, sleepyheads? Good. Because the lights may have dimmed, but Linda's story only got brighter. Let's fast forward a bit. In the weeks after her experience, Linda couldn't shake the feeling she was being watched. Not in the oops, forgot to close the blinds kind of way. More like someone is studying me like I'm a science project wrapped in flannel pajamas way. She started noticing black cars, men in suits, phone calls where no one spoke. Now, I know New York has its fair share of eccentrics, but even for Manhattan, this was getting extra. One day, she got a letter, handwritten, no return address. Inside, a message. We know what you saw. Do not speak. Chilling, right? But instead of hiding under her duvet forever, Linda did something bold. She contacted Bud Hopkins, a well-known UFO researcher and author who lived just blocks away. I mean, of course a UFO researcher lives in New York. You can find everything in that city, bagels, Broadway, and apparently alien, abduction experts. Bud met with Linda, interviewed her, hypnotized her, and what she recalled during those sessions, even more vivid, more details of the craft, the way the beings moved, graceful but eerily silent, the sensation of being completely seen, like her very molecules were under inspection. And then there was the political twist. Remember those 2 bodyguards on Brooklyn Bridge? Yeah. Turns out, according to Bud, they weren't just any bodyguards. They were part of a foreign diplomat security team. Someone big, like invited to the White House big. And apparently, he saw the whole thing, too. But when pressed, he vanished. No official statement, no interview, just diplomatic silence and sealed records. Classic. Now let's take a soft breath together. You, me, and the idea that maybe, just maybe, a woman really was taken through a wall of glass, floated above New York City, and returned before sunrise, like nothing happened. Or maybe something still lingers. Linda claims the visits didn't stop. She'd wake up to lights flickering, strange marks on her body, small circular patterns like someone had played, connect the dots on her back. She once even dreamed of the blue beings standing at the foot of her bed, except she was awake, eyes open, frozen. And here's the kicker. When Bud Hopkins shared Linda's story in his lectures and books, dozens of people came forward with similar stories, different states, different years, same blue light, same paralysis, same small beings with the eyes that see through dreams, and all of them had never met, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle scattered across the globe, all fitting together in the shape of something we still can't name. Now, you might ask, why would aliens visit New York? And honestly, maybe it's the bagels, or the fact that nobody questions anything weird after 11 p.m. in the city. Oh, look, a raccoon on a scooter? Must be Tuesday. But maybe, just maybe, the stars above Manhattan aren't as quiet as we think. And as you snuggle deeper under your blanket, remember, windows might be solid, but stories, they float through cities, through time, and maybe, just maybe, through the glass of your dreams, too. Now, sleepy traveler, stay right there. Don't move, because up next, we head somewhere that might feel a bit more familiar, yet far stranger. A sleepy town, a schoolyard, and dozens of children staring at beings no adult believed. Scene 05 is on the horizon. Stay cozy, stay curious, and keep one eye open for glowy little visitors. Hey again, dream catchers. Still cozy? Still awake? Or maybe just floating gently into the strange current of tonight's tales. Either way, cast your line, because this next story starts on the water and doesn't stay there for long. So picture this. It's August 1976, deep in the woods of Maine, USA. 4 close friends, Jack, Charlie, Jim, and Chuck, decide it's high time for a rustic getaway. No cell phones, no emails, no traffic, just fishing poles, a canoe, and a good old-fashioned campfire. Classic guys' trip, right? They weren't looking for trouble, just bass, beers, and bragging rights. But the thing is, the wilderness sometimes gives you more than you bargain for. And on their second night by the river, it gave them something strange. Now, this wasn't just a casual camping setup. These guys were outdoorsy. They had planned the trip, packed gear, picked a perfect riverside spot, and even lit a massive bonfire that night. Because nothing says relaxation like staring into flames while making fun of your friend's terrible marshmallow roasting technique. They noticed something odd just after sunset, a bright light, too bright to be a star, too silent to be a helicopter, hovered in the sky above the river. At first, they thought it might be a plane, but it wasn't moving, just hovering, unnaturally still, like the universe hit pause, and then, without warning, it shot upward, vanished, gone. Okay, weird, right? But maybe just a trick of the eye, a shooting star, atmospheric weirdness. They laughed it off, tossed more wood on the fire, and went back to arguing about who caught the biggest fish. Except that about an hour later, the light came back. Only this time, it wasn't content with hovering. It was descending, closer, brighter, silent. The guys scrambled for their canoe, paddling out into the water. Why, we may never know. I mean, if I saw a glowing orb dropping from the sky, my instinct would not be, quick, get in the tiny floating tub. But hey, panic does weird things to the brain.
Out there, in the middle of the river, they watched as the light hovered above them. Then, bam, a blinding flash. Everything went white. And the next thing they knew, they were back on the shore. The fire was out. Their canoe was dry. And hours had passed. Not minutes, hours. Each of them had the same groggy, foggy feeling. Like waking up from a dream that wasn't yours. Like something had borrowed your brain back at home. The real weirdness began. Nightmares, identical ones, of floating creatures. Slender figures with long limbs and impassible eyes. Eyes that watched without blinking. Each man independently saw himself lying on a table in a cold, metallic room. Voices in their heads, not their ears. Sensation without touch. Fear without noise. And maybe the most chilling detail, one of them remembered a creature turning to him and saying, "You will forget, but you will feel it." Who? Sleep tight, right? The friends eventually underwent hypnotic regression, and the stories they told were nearly identical. Descriptions of tools that floated, needles without pain, and feelings of intense curiosity, not from them, but from the beings. Like someone was studying a strange new animal they'd never seen before. An animal called Jim, or Chuck, or Subject 5B, who knows? Of course, skeptics said it was mass hysteria. Just 4 friends caught up in the woods, drinking too much and dreaming the same dream.
But here's the thing. They all passed polygraph tests, and none of them ever tried to profit off the story. In fact, one of them refused interviews for decades. He said talking about it made the dreams come back. That maybe something didn't want the story told. Maybe it still doesn't. So, if your next fishing trip includes a glowing light in the sky, maybe just stay on the shore. Or better yet, stay indoors listening to sleep stories like this one where you're safe, cozy, and hopefully not being monitored by invisible river aliens. All right, still awake? No? Good. But if you are, the next tale takes us to a sunny schoolyard, where a group of cheerful children met something truly unforgettable. Yep, big eyes, strange being, and not a single adult who believed a word of it. Now here's where things tiptoe from creepy into borderline sci-fi bedtime story, but all from first-hand accounts. After the strange incident, the men returned home, trying to just move on. You know, pretend it was nothing. Go back to work, maybe avoid ponds for a while. But something had changed. Jack, the quietest of the group, began sketching strange symbols. Not like doodles, like diagrams, precise ones. Geometric shapes he swore he'd never seen before. Yet he could draw them in perfect detail. And Charlie started waking up with tiny triangular marks on his legs, always in sets of 3, always in the same spot, and always after nights when he dreamed of the Watchers. His term, not mine. Kind of gives your goosebumps a second round, doesn't it? Meanwhile, Jim developed a peculiar reaction to light. His eyes, once totally normal, became intensely sensitive. Sunlight burned. Flashlights felt like laser beams. He joked he might have been part moth now, except he wasn't laughing. Then there was Chuck. He began avoiding electronics. Said he could hear TVs even when they were off. Static noise that wasn't on the air, but in the air. And don't even get him started on microwave. He claimed one time. The beeping made him black out for a full minute. You know it's serious when someone willingly stops using the microwave. Their families were understandably concerned. And their doctors? Well, baffled is probably the kindest way to describe it. Eventually, the 4 friends reunited. Less for a fishing trip, more for a group reality check. They talked it all out. Compared notes. Each one thought they were going nuts, until they realized they were all experiencing the same things. So they did what any curious but slightly terrified humans might do. They reached out to a UFO research group. Yep, turns out there are actual organizations that take alien encounters very seriously. They hooked them up with hypnotherapists and investigators. And let me tell you, the tapes from those sessions, haunting. Eerily similar memories surfaced across all 4. Like lying on metal beds under harsh white lights. Like being floated, yes, floated, through narrow corridors by invisible forces. Like hearing voices. Not in English, but somehow understood anyway. One of them described it as
Thoughts spoken straight into your brain, but with an accent, which is such an oddly specific and very human way to explain telepathy, don't you think?
Also, side note, can we just appreciate the courage it takes to be hypnotized in front of strangers, knowing you might blurt out, "Yes, the floating squid thing whispered to me about time crystals and took my shoe." The researchers concluded that the men truly believed what they were saying. There was no evidence of fabrication, no signs they were just in it for attention. In fact, they mostly just wanted peace, and maybe a few dreamless nights. And to this day, none of them have changed their story. That fishing trip in 1976 remains one of the most consistently reported multi-witness alien abduction cases in U.S. history. Even the town where it happened? Locals still whisper about it, though naturally no one names the river anymore, because, tourism. And sure, there are always doubters. Was it a hallucination? Group hypnosis gone wild? Too much bug spray fumes by the campfire? Maybe. But the four friends never fished together again. Not once. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most convincing part of the whole tale. Because no alien abduction proof will ever be as chilling as a grown man voluntarily giving up his annual fishing trip. That's real. All right, let's paddle gently out of that one. You're doing great. Still tucked in? Good. Because next we enter a schoolyard in Africa, where dozens of kids came face to face with something from the stars. And this time, there was no missing time. Just wide, terrified eyes. Let's float there now. To scene 06. School children and the beings with big eyes. Blankets up. Brains open. Let's go. You're doing great. Still tucked in? Good. Because next we enter a schoolyard in Africa, where dozens of kids came face to face with something from the stars. And this time, there was no missing time. Just wide, terrified eyes. Let's float there now. To scene 06. School children and the beings with big eyes. Blankets up. Brains open. Let's go. All right, sleepyheads, we're trading schoolyards for cornfields now. Yep, nothing says classic alien encounter like a lone farmer, a silent field, and a mysterious red light hanging in the sky like it forgot how gravity works. This one comes from rural Nebraska. Picture it. Wide open land. Flat enough to see a cow sneeze from 3 miles away. Just rows and rows of corn stretching so far it feels like the earth might curve just to tuck them in. Our protagonist is Eldon Strickland. A 52-year-old lifelong farmer, not the type to exaggerate unless he's talking about the size of last summer's squash. It was late September, harvest season. The kind of night where the air smells like dry husks and moonlight makes the tractor tracks glow faint silver. Eldon was finishing up a late-night irrigation check. Just making sure the crops weren't secretly plotting drought-related rebellion. He said he saw something odd. A red light. Just hovering. At first, he thought it might be a drone. But drones don't usually make the air hum like a subwoofer at a techno concert. And they don't shine straight down like a laser pointer from space. The light wasn't blinking, wasn't moving, just hanging there. About 30 feet above the field. Dead silent except for that low-frequency buzz that you don't so much hear as feel in your teeth. Eldon, being a practical man, did what any Midwestern farmer would do. He stood under it and stared, hand shielding his eyes, hat slightly tilted back, mouth just barely open. Classic alien abduction ready posture. Then flash. He said the red light suddenly brightened, and he couldn't move. He wasn't scared at first, more like confused then, sleepy. The world went white. No pain, no sound, no sensation. Just a feeling that someone was looking inside his thoughts, like flipping through a newspaper written in heartbeat rhythms and muscle twitches. When Eldon came to, it was 3 hours later. He was lying in the middle of his field. His boots were off, placed neatly next to him like he'd just laid down for a picnic and forgot the food. His wristwatch was gone, his belt buckle twisted sideways, and weirdest of all, his old tractor, parked 50 yards away, was still running. Its fuel gauge hadn't moved. Now, that might not sound spooky unless you're a farmer. But when Eldon did the math, his tractor had been idling the whole time. and it should have burned half a tank of diesel. But the tank was still full, which is either impossible, or Eldon found the first tractor with a secret hybrid alien engine. He stumbled home in a daze, told his wife he must have fallen asleep in the field, and she, used to his weirdness, just told him to wash his socks before getting in bed. But Eldon couldn't sleep, because later that night, he found a small triangle-shaped scar just behind his ear, a scar he'd never had before. No redness, no scab, just a perfect pale triangle, like someone pressed a branding iron shaped like geometry homework onto him and said, "There, now your catalog." He didn't tell anyone for weeks, until he started dreaming. In those dreams, he was weightless, floating inside a soft, white space. No walls, no floor, just presence. And that same red light, gently pulsing like a heartbeat made of jellyfish glow. In one dream, he remembers them, whatever they were, communicating not with words, but through feelings. One was curiosity, another, almost affection, as if they didn't mean harm, as if they were studying him the way we might watch a bird make its nest. Of course, when Eldon finally told a local radio station about his story, the reactions were mixed. Some folks said he was drunk. Others said he probably fell and hit his head on a rock. One guy said, and I quote, "That's what you get for using GMO corn." But a few old-timers, they pulled him aside and whispered, "Hey, I saw something too." Turns out that red light had been seen before. Same field, same week, 10 years earlier. Eldon couldn't shake it. Not the dreams, not the scar, and definitely not the feeling that something had watched him like he was a particularly curious episode of Planet Earth. As days turned into weeks, subtle changes began to unfold in his life. And no, we're not talking about suddenly becoming a vegetable whisperer or growing glow-in-the-dark corn. But his wife noticed he was calmer, somehow less quick to curse at the television during weather forecasts, and he swore he could feel his crops before they even needed water, like a strange sixth sense had taken root somewhere between his ribs. He started writing things down like snippets of symbols he'd see during his half-asleep states, loops, sharp angles, and spirals that seemed to shimmer in his mind even after he woke. One evening, while sipping decaf on his porch and watching the stars like they owed him rent, he felt a familiar hum, deep and slow, brushing across the wheat like a breeze from nowhere. He didn't panic. He didn't run. He just said, out loud, "I'm still here." Nothing answered, but a single red dot blinked across the sky, paused, then zipped away like Firefly with a rocket booster. Now, before you chalk this up to farmer folklore or say, "Well, that's just Uncle Eldon being Uncle Eldon," there's one final twist when his story hit a small regional UFO forum online. Someone from 2 counties over messaged him with a photo taken 3 years earlier in the same part of Nebraska. It was blurry, grainy, and looked like someone tried to photograph a tomato with a flip phone. But in the top corner of the image, you could make out a hovering red orb suspended in a midnight blue sky. The timestamp? Almost to the minute. 3 years before Eldon's encounter, same date, same hour. That, dear listeners, gave Eldon chills. He printed the photo, framed it, and hung it above the fireplace, right next to a pair of taxidermy antlers and a ceramic chicken that nobody in the family remembers buying. So what do we make of it all? A red light with a memory. A cosmic science experiment with a fondness for polite farmers? Or maybe, just maybe, somewhere in the vast sky above, something out there is keeping tabs on humanity's quiet. Observers. The people who aren't rushing around cities or glued to screens are those who listen to the wind, tend to the earth, and look up every night hoping to find something more. Eldon's not scared anymore. He's curious. And every so often, on especially quiet nights when the stars feel unusually sharp, he leaves his boots by the door, sits on his porch with a warm blanket, and waits not for fear, but for wonder. Because sometimes what abducts you doesn't take you away. It brings you a piece of the universe you didn't know you'd been missing. It started, as so many weird tales do, with a late-night drive and a really bad playlist. Melanie was headed home from her sister's birthday in rural Oregon, cruising down a 2-lane road with nothing but pine trees, darkness, and the smell of leftover cupcakes filling her old Honda. She'd just passed mile marker 14 when she noticed something off. In her rearview mirror, a small light flickered. At first, she thought it was a motorbike, but it didn't bounce like a headlight. It didn't wobble like someone tailing her. It just floated. Not on the road. Above it, kind of like a star that got lost on its way to space. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, and did the thing we all do when the car's too quiet and too dark. She turned up the radio and convinced herself it was nothing. Only the light didn't leave. In fact, over the next 10 minutes, it multiplied. 1 tiny dot becoming 2, then 3, softly blinking like polite fireflies that had learned synchronized swimming. They followed her, sometimes dancing left, sometimes drifting right, always. Staying just outside the edges of her taillights, like they were testing the boundary between curiosity and contact. Melanie, understandably, began narrating out loud, like someone in a horror movie who really doesn't want to be in a horror movie. Okay. Nope, that's fine. Sure, just floating lights. Probably swamp gas. Definitely not aliens. Ha ha ha. She made herself laugh. It did not help. And then, as she rounded a curve and glanced again into her mirror, the lights vanished. Clean. Gone. Like someone had turned off the stars behind her. She exhaled, relaxed her grip on the wheel, and almost felt silly. Almost. But just as she let her guard down, the dashboard screen flashed white, then static, then nothing. The car didn't stop. The engine didn't die. But every single light inside, radio, clock, even the little green seatbelt icon, flickered off for exactly 4 seconds, then back on, like a power blink, from somewhere. She pulled over, heart racing like it had just run a 5K through her ribcage, and sat in silence. That's when she saw it again, not behind her this time, but above. 3 lights, triangular, hovering in the air. No sound, no movement, just stillness, like a deer staring back at headlights. But from 1,000 feet up, Melanie didn't run. She didn't record. She didn't even scream. She just stared, as if the air between them had turned thick, like water holding her in place. A few moments, or minutes later, the lights flickered once more, then zipped skyward, vanishing into the stars with a kind of effortless speed that made fighter jets look like lazy bees. Melanie sat there another 10 minutes before her fingers moved again. She got home safe. Didn't tell anyone for days. But what haunted her wasn't the lights above, or even the flickering electronics. It was the rearview mirror. Because even now, months later, whenever she drives alone at night, she swears she still sees those tiny flickers dancing in the corner of her mirror. Not every night. Not even every week. But just often enough to make her wonder if they're checking back in. Not to scare her. Not to take her. Just to say, we see you. So if you're driving late tonight and spot a little light that just won't fade from your rear view, maybe don't panic. Maybe just wave politely and whisper, "Hi there. I see you too." Angela Baines wasn't someone easily rattled. She taught 3rd grade by day, wrangled her 2 energetic Labradors by evening, and by night, well, she enjoyed peace, chamomile tea, and the occasional true crime podcast, because nothing says good night like an unsolved mystery and a soothing narrator. It was a Wednesday when things got weird. She was driving home from her sister's place halfway through a winding forest road with nothing but trees, frogs, and maybe one lost owl judging her from a branch. The road was empty. The air was still. And that's when she saw them. The lights. They first appeared in her rearview mirror. No sound. No engine. Just a soft, bluish glow. She figured it was a car, maybe one of those silent Teslas with fancy high beams. So she tapped her brakes and pulled a little to the side, but the lights didn't pass. Instead, they hovered behind her, not above, not on the ground, just hovering. She blinked. The lights blinked back.
She adjusted the mirror. The lights adjusted with it, as if they were watching her. Through the reflection, it gave her chills, the kind that makes your scalp feel like it wants to evacuate. She took a deep breath and glanced over her shoulder. Nothing. Just dark trees and that owl still judging her. But in the mirror, the lights were still there. Closer now. Almost pressing against the glass. Her heartbeat, which had previously been chilling at a relaxed bedtime pace, began its audition for a drumline. Angela gripped the wheel and did what any rational adult woman would do at this hour. She turned the radio off. Because apparently the international sign of I'm scared is absolute silence. The lights then began to shift, pulsing slowly. Not like hazard lights, more like, dare she say it, breathing, blue to white to blue again. She leaned in, curious despite herself. Her reflection looked distorted. Not in a funhouse mirror kind of way, but like her face had been stretched and scanned and gently, nudged to the left by an invisible thumb. Okay, she whispered, voice barely audible. You've had too much tea. And just as she said it, the lights flickered, and so did her entire mirror. It fuzzed out like static on a screen. And then it showed something else. Not her face, not the car, but a room. Bright, white, metallic, and for the briefest second, a figure. Tall, pale, elongated eyes, like sketch from one of her students who didn't study anatomy but had a vivid imagination. The image vanished as quickly as it came. Angela slammed her brakes. The mirror snapped back to normal. Her dogs, somehow asleep through all of this, stirred in the back seat, one letting out a tiny boof, as if dreaming of chasing alien squirrels. Angela looked again. Nothing. No lights. Just her own. Tired eyes and the faint echo of something impossible. She made it home without another flicker, but that night, as she brushed her teeth, she caught herself avoiding the mirror. And for weeks afterward, every time she drove, she angled her rear view just slightly down. Not enough to admit fear, of course, but just enough to miss anything strange. She tried to tell herself it was stress or a trick of light or too much melatonin. But in her heart, Angela knew those lights weren't from around here. And mirrors? Well, maybe. They're not just for lipstick checks and tailgaters after all. So if you're driving tonight, especially on a quiet, foresty road, and you catch an odd blue glow in your mirror, don't panic, just smile politely. Maybe they're checking in. Or maybe they're admiring your driving posture. Either way, keep the mirror clean, your mind open, and your chamomile tea slightly underdosed. The early winter mist draped itself over Ilkley Moor like a quiet secret. It was the kind of Yorkshire morning where the hills held their breath, sheep wandered like old ghosts, and the silence was thick enough to make your thoughts echo. Philip Spencer, a retired police officer with a camera slung across his chest and a pocket full of peppermints, was out for a morning walk. He wasn't chasing ghosts or mysteries, just a shortcut through the fog to visit his father-in-law. The path wound through familiar terrain, ferns, mossy, stones, and that funny crooked sign that always leaned a little more to the left than it should. But that morning, something was off. Birds weren't singing. His watch ticked too slowly, or maybe his feet were moving too fast. He couldn't tell. Then just ahead, through the fog, a figure. Not quite human, not quite silhouette. It was short, maybe 4 feet tall, with long arms, a slightly bulbous head, and legs that moved like they didn't know what knees were. Spencer, who had once chased down pickpockets in Leeds. He lifted his camera instinctively and clicked. The figure turned its head, not fast, not startled, just calmly, as if it expected to be seen. Then it disappeared over the hill. Spencer, a man more accustomed to sorting arguments in pubs than chasing otherworldly beings, bolted up the slope. But there was nothing. No footprints, no movement, just fog, and a strange tingling in the air like the moor had, swallowed sound itself. Slightly dazed, he resumed his walk, arriving at his father-in-law's home nearly an hour late. The odd part, he had only been walking for 15 minutes. His watch said one thing, the kitchen clock said another, and somewhere in between, 60 full minutes had gone. Missing. Later, he developed the film. Most shots were expected. Misty trails, stones, the curious, sheep. But one stood out. A blurry but distinct image of the creature. Not a trick of light. Not a shadow. A real, solid, alien-like figure against the Yorkshire landscape. It became a sensation. Experts argued about angles and grain. Skeptics cried hoax. But even they admitted the image was odd. Too odd. And Spencer? He never went back to that part of the moor. He said it felt different now, like the land was watching, waiting. He began to dream strange dreams. Lights overhead, a humming sound. Cold metal against his skin. Always waking up with a start and never quite remembering what came next. Sleep became foggy, just like that morning. And to this day, no one has explained where the hour went, or what exactly that photograph shows. Maybe Ilkley Moor knows. Maybe the mist knows. Or maybe, just maybe, some visitors aren't keen on being seen, but make rare exceptions for curious morning walkers and retired officers with cameras. So next time you wander into the fog and your watch feels a little off, don't worry, you might just be part of the next great mystery. And who knows? Maybe they'll smile for your photo too. Spencer tried to tell himself it was just a coincidence. A trick of time, maybe his watch was cheap, or the fog was thicker than usual, and made him disoriented. But those thoughts didn't sit right. Not after he started having the dreams. Not after he began waking up. In the middle of the night, with the sound of distant static buzzing in his ears. Like an old television set left on in another room, except there was no TV on and no other room. One morning, he noticed something new. A faint triangle of tiny marks behind his left ear, barely visible. Almost like a rash, or a scar from a place no razor could reach. His doctor called it a mild skin reaction. Probably an allergy, they said, but Spencer hadn't changed soaps in years. And the marks, they glowed faintly under a blacklight. No one could explain that. Then came the strange calls. No voice, no message, just silence. Or what he thought was silence, until he held the phone away and realized there was a low hum. Subtle, unsettling. It happened 3 times in 1 week, always around 3:33 a.m. A perfectly symmetrical time, if you're into that kind of thing. Friends told him to forget about it, but you can't forget something that feels like it's watching you back. And besides, it wasn't just him anymore. His wife started dreaming the same things. She once woke up and whispered, "Did they say anything about the light?" before rolling over and forgetting she ever said it. It was subtle, that part, the kind of thing that sounds silly in daylight, but at night, when you're alone, it sticks to the walls. As for the photograph, he never profited from it. In fact, he gave away the negative to researchers. Let them figure it out, he said. But they never really did. One team said it looked like a sculpture. Another said it couldn't possibly be faked with the technology available in 1987. One researcher even suggested, half jokingly, half not, that if this was real, it might be one of the few honest images we've ever gotten of our mysterious visitors. Spencer didn't argue. He just smiled. That same quiet smile he wore when someone brought up aliens at dinner parties. He'd glance out the window then, like he was waiting for the fog to roll in again. Years later, a young hiker named Ellie claimed to have seen something similar on the same moor. Just a flash of movement, short and fast, before her phone turned off by itself. She laughed about it on a podcast, but at the end of the episode, in a quieter tone, she admitted she hadn't gone back since. Said the hills didn't feel empty anymore. Said her GPS never worked right up there. So what really happened on Ilkley Moor that morning? Was it just a trick of the light, a tired man's imagination? Or something else, something that stepped briefly into our world, posed for a photo and slipped back into the mist with an hour of time in its pocket? Maybe they wanted to be seen just once. Maybe they were testing our reaction.
Or maybe, just maybe, they dropped by for tea and forgot to check the time zone difference. Whatever the truth, the Ilkley Moore case remains one of the strangest in UFO history, not because it's the most dramatic or the most frightening, but because it feels so quiet, so real. A man, a foggy morning, and a single blurry image that refuses to be explained, like a half-remembered dream, or a message written in fog that vanishes just before you finish reading it. So next time, you're out walking in the early morning mist, and your watch skips ahead, and the birds forget to sing, take a picture, just in case. It was the kind of small town where everyone knows everyone, and the streets go quiet by sundown, with porch lights blinking on like sleepy fireflies. On one particular cul-de-sac, lined with maple trees and picket fences, something curious began to stir, not in the waking world, but in the dreams of its youngest residents. It started on a Monday, just after a spring thunderstorm. Nothing unusual at first, but by Wednesday morning, a dozen children across the neighborhood all woke up with the same story, not just similar, but identical. Each one described it in their own sleepy way, rubbing their eyes over cereal bowls or whispering it on the bus to school. They dreamed of a round silver room, smooth walls, a ceiling that pulsed gently like the belly of a jellyfish. There was no door, but they weren't scared. The air smelled like rain on metal, and standing in the center, quietly observing them, were tall beings, thin and graceful, with elongated heads and large eyes that blinked in slow motion. The children weren't touched, weren't harmed, just watched. The beings never spoke with mouths, but somehow every child heard the same thing in their heads. We are only looking, like a thought that wasn't theirs, but arrived anyway, placed softly in the mind like a feather on water. One child drew it in crayon before school, silver ovals with stick figure legs and eyes bigger than the sun. Another said she heard music in the room, not like a song, but more like the inside of a seashell. A boy named Liam insisted he floated gently, not on a bed or floor, but in the air itself, weightless and calm. When his teacher overheard him explaining it at recess, she paused, because that morning, her own son had described the exact same dream. At first, parents laughed it off, a mass case of childhood imagination. Maybe they all saw the same cartoon, or maybe some neighbor had told a spooky story and it spread like wildfire through their minds. But then the preschoolers chimed in, kids too, young to lie in sync, too young to even describe shapes that specific. One toddler, barely able to form full sentences, said she went up in the sleepy light with the big eyes man. That was the phrase, sleepy light. It came up again and again. It caught the attention of a local journalist who decided to interview a few families. The article was short, tucked away in the back of the weekly paper. But the story didn't stay small. A retired psychologist who'd once worked with sleep studies at a nearby university reached out to the parents. He didn't claim to know what happened, but he said something strange, something soft-spoken and serious. Shared dream phenomena isn't common, especially across different ages. But I've seen this before. Not here, but elsewhere. It's not always a dream. He asked if the children had complained of headaches or nosebleeds or forgetting things they used to know. Some had. One boy had trouble tying his shoes again, even though he'd known how for years. A girl forgot the name of her favorite stuffed animal. And, most chilling of all, when asked to draw their dream rooms again a few weeks later, all the children left out the tall beings, as if their minds had erased the visitors, but kept the space around them. Empty silver rooms, glowing walls, but no watchers, like memories, scrubbed clean. As weeks passed, the neighborhood returned to its quiet rhythm. Spring gave way to the gentle heat of early summer, and the children's dreams seemed to fade, like fog lifting with the morning sun. But for some families, the strange undercurrent remained. Parents began noticing small things, a child suddenly afraid to sleep with the lights off, though they'd never minded before. Another began drawing only in silver crayons, every page covered in circles and swirls. One girl, who'd never spoken in her sleep, now mumbled softly at night in a rhythm that was almost musical, a lullaby in no known language. One evening, a mother named Dana sat reading in bed when her daughter wandered in, bleary-eyed and pale. She crawled under the blankets without a word. Dana asked if she'd had a bad dream. The girl nodded, then whispered, "They're still looking." She couldn't explain who, just them, eyes, watching from behind something invisible. Dana didn't sleep that night. She stayed awake, staring at her daughter, wondering how many other parents were lying in bed doing the same thing. Curiosity turned into quiet panic when a school counselor confided to a few parents that 5 children had independently drawn the same spiral shape during an art activity, a spiral with dots at regular intervals along the curve, one dot circled in red. When asked what it was, the children shrugged. "That's where they came from," one girl replied. "The red one." The counselor didn't press further. She just wrote it down and locked the drawings in her file cabinet. The local newspaper ran a follow-up article, this time longer, more speculative. The title read, "Whispers of a Shared Dream. Are our kids seeing something we're not?" The piece attracted a few UFO enthusiasts and one retired professor from the UK who claimed this wasn't the first time children had shared sleep visitations in rural communities. He referenced similar clusters of cases in Wales during the 1970s and in a mountain town in Peru in the 90s. In every case, the witnesses were children. And in every case, the dreams faded. But something always lingered. Then, something unexpected happened. A documentary team from a regional TV channel arrived, hoping to film a soft paranormal segment. The team interviewed kids, families, even the school staff. But during a routine aerial shot over the neighborhood using a drone, one crew member noticed something unusual in the footage. A faint distortion, barely visible, hovering for a few seconds above one of the houses, like a ripple in the air. When the frame was paused and zoomed in, the ripple resolved into a shape, oval, shimmering, like light bending over glass. The footage was inconclusive, but for the crew who saw it firsthand, it was enough to leave. Them visibly rattled. After the story aired, the neighborhood fell into a strange silence. Fewer children played outside. A few families quietly moved away. No one blamed them. Some parents stopped talking about the dreams altogether, as if silence would make it all go away. But one child, a boy named Jonah, kept drawing the same thing over and over. Not the silver room anymore, not the spiral, but a single eye, enormous and reflective. In its pupil was a tiny house, his house. His parents found one of these sketches taped to his window facing the street, as if he wanted them to see it. When asked why, he only said they forgot something. One stormy night, months after the last dream had been mentioned, Jonah disappeared for 2 hours. Police were called. Neighbors searched the neighborhood. When he returned, his clothes were dry despite the downpour. He had no memory of where he'd been. But when his mother hugged him in relief, she noticed something small behind his ear, a thin, pale triangle. Not a bruise, not a scar, just there. When asked about it, Jonah looked confused. "They left it so I could hear them when they come back," he said, as if repeating something told to him long ago. It was a quiet October evening when the Carter family decided to do something spontaneous, a night picnic under the stars. They lived on the edge of a vast forest in eastern Kentucky, the kind of place where porch lights still flicker in the wind and the woods, seem to whisper when no one's around. Jake Carter, the father, had grown up in these parts and knew the woods like the back of his hand. But tonight, something felt different. They packed sandwiches, hot cocoa, and a few camping lanterns, and set off down a trail they'd walked dozens of times. The kids, Emma and Luke, skipped ahead, their flashlights bouncing off damp leaves and curious tree trunks. The family hiked in for about 20 minutes until they reached their favorite clearing, a wide, grassy hollow surrounded by tall pines. The sky above was perfectly clear, studded with stars like pinholes in a dark velvet sheet. They spread out a blanket, passed around Coco, and leaned back to listen to the hum of crickets. But that's when it started. Emma was the first to notice something unusual. She pointed toward the trees and whispered, "Dad, look." A soft, pulsating light, faint as a candle at first, hovered just beyond the tree line. It was low to the ground, glowing a soft bluish white, and completely still, not flickering like a flashlight, not bobbing like a firefly, just there. Jake squinted, stood up, and took a few cautious steps forward. The light didn't move. Luke giggled nervously and whispered, "It looks like it's watching us." That's when a second light appeared, and a third, all in a line, evenly spaced, hovering about 3 feet off the ground. The air shifted. The wind that had been rustling the trees stopped all at once, like someone had paused the forest. The crickets went silent. And then they stepped out. Humanoid shapes, 4 to 5 feet tall. Their bodies shimmered faintly like moonlight on water, more glowing outlines than solid forms. No visible features, no eyes or mouths, just shapes, walking slowly into the clearing. Not aggressively, almost gently, curious. Jake told the kids to stay behind him, voice calm but firm. He wasn't afraid, not yet, but he was alert. The figures didn't make a sound. Their feet didn't crunch the leaves. No twigs snapped. They just moved forward, graceful and quiet. One of them paused at the edge of the blanket, tilting its head slightly, as if examining the thermos of cocoa sitting nearby. Then something stranger happened. The family's lantern, an old battery-powered one, flickered and went out, but the light didn't disappear. Instead, a soft, ambient glow remained, coming from the beings themselves. They were now the only source of light in the clearing. Their glow pulsed faintly like breathing. Emma, wide-eyed, whispered, "I can hear them in my head." Jake turned sharply. "What do you mean?" She nodded. "They're not saying words, just feelings, like they're asking if we're scared." Luke added, "They feel kind, like how Grandma felt when she tucked me in." That made Jake's spine tingle. After what felt like 10 minutes, but could have been seconds or hours, the figures slowly backed away. They didn't turn. They just drifted backwards into the woods. One by one, their glow dimmed until the clearing returned to its natural dark. The wind resumed. The crickets chirped again, and it was as if nothing had happened, except it had. When they got home, something odd struck them. Their watches and phones all showed the time. As 11:14 p.m., they had left the house at 8 p.m., and the hike was barely 40 minutes round trip. Yet somehow 3 hours had vanished. None of them remembered anything after the lights faded, just waking up in the car driveway, parked neatly. The next morning, Jake found something in the grass where they had sat. A small, smooth stone, perfectly round, warm to the touch, and glowing faintly blue, even in the sunlight. No one could explain it. Not even the local ranger, who just raised an eyebrow and said, "You're not the first to see strange things up that trail." That glowing stone stayed on Jake's nightstand for weeks. It never lost its color, never cooled, and somehow felt alive. When held, it radiated a warmth not unlike the feeling of standing in sunlight. Gentle, comforting, but oddly not from heat. Emma claimed it hummed when the room was silent, just enough to tickle the back of your thoughts, like a lullaby you almost remember from childhood. Luke once whispered, "I think it dreams when we sleep," but no one knew exactly what he meant. Jake tried taking it to a geologist in town, an old friend named Harold, who'd studied Appalachian rock formations for decades. The moment Harold held it, his expression changed. He grew quiet, his fingers brushing it like a fragile museum piece. This isn't from here, he murmured. I mean, not from Kentucky, not from Earth, maybe. When Jake pressed further, Harold only shook his head and handed it back. Whatever this is, keep it safe. And don't tell too many people you have it. They didn't. But strange things started to happen anyway. One evening, the family's television flickered on by itself, just static at first, then bursts of light forming patterns like ripples in water. Emma stared at it, blinking slowly. It's trying to show us something, she said in that soft, trance-like voice she'd used before. In the clearing. On another night, the family dog stood in the yard, frozen, staring into the trees with hackles raised, yet not growling, just watching. Jake stepped outside and once again saw that familiar bluish glow deep in the woods. It didn't come closer, just hovered there, waiting. Sleep became strange, lucid dreams, always in the same place, back in the forest clearing. But it was different each time. Some nights, the glowing beings walked with them, pointing to stars that shimmered like symbols. Other nights, Jake stood beneath an endless sky where constellations shifted as if they were alive. Emma began drawing the shapes she saw, spirals, loops, and strange glyphs, none from her textbooks, and none that Google could explain. They never felt threatened, just watched, like the family had been noticed, and whatever watched them was still curious. Then came the night of the electrical storm. A lightning bolt struck just beyond the tree line, bright enough to turn the sky white. The lights in their house blinked, and for a split second, only a heartbeat, they saw silhouettes through the kitchen window. Not reflections, not illusions, shapes standing still in the rain. When Jake stepped outside, they were gone. But the old lantern from that night in the woods, stored in the shed, was glowing faintly. It hadn't had batteries in weeks. Later, when Jake reviewed photos from their picnic night, the ones they'd taken on his phone, something odd emerged. In the far background of one image, barely visible beyond the trees, was a shape, a figure, not glowing this time, just there, watching, still. He hadn't seen it at the time. None of them had, but once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Emma started asking more questions. About stars, about time, about whether people could leave Earth without rockets. Luke, surprisingly calm, began keeping a notebook of messages he said came to him in dreams. Always symbols, occasionally short. Phrases like, "They're not far now," or "You remember more than you think." When Jake finally opened up to a friend at work, a quiet guy named Paul who loved conspiracy podcasts, the reaction surprised him. Paul didn't laugh, didn't mock. He just leaned in and said, "I think you've been marked." Then he told Jake about the other farmers, hikers, even military men, who'd seen glowing beings in the Appalachian backwoods. Always peaceful, always watching. Sometimes they took people. Sometimes they just left behind signs, stones, symbols, missing time. Jake didn't believe all of it, but he couldn't deny what he'd seen, what he'd felt. It's been over a year since that night in the woods, and the glowing stone still rests on the same nightstand. Some nights it hums, louder. Some nights it's completely silent, but one thing is constant. Every member of the Carter family now dreams in stars. And whether those dreams are memories or messages, no one's quite sure. But none of them fear the forest anymore. If anything, they feel like they're being gently prepared for something. The town of Elridge wasn't much more than a stretch of gas stations, a diner with chipped booths, and a hardware store where the bell above the door had rung for 43 years. Nestled between two green hills in the forgotten folds of West Virginia, it was the kind of Place people didn't move to. They were just born there and never found much reason to leave. Quiet, still, sleepy until 1. Spring morning, a low hum began to whisper beneath the surface of everything. At first, it was barely noticeable. Just a gentle vibration underfoot, like standing too close to a giant refrigerator. Some chalked it up to distant construction, or maybe new power. Lines humming through the hills, but days passed. Then weeks, and the hum didn't fade. It became part of the town's rhythm. The baker said her rising dough puffed faster. A mechanic claimed his tools felt magnetized. Dogs paced at night. Children cried in their sleep, murmuring about the sound under the floor. The diner's cook, Miss Thelma, joked it was just the earth singing lullabies, until the lights in her kitchen began to flicker every time she cracked an egg. Farmers found that their cows stood staring east at sunrise, like something beyond the hills had caught their attention. And always, that hum. Low, even impossible to record. Phones couldn't catch it. Microphones failed to register anything. But everyone heard it, or rather felt it, especially at night when the air grew heavy with silence, and the hum became like breath in your bones. Then came the dreams. Across town, people described visions of vast tunnels beneath Elridge. Tunnels made not of rock or soil, but of glowing silver pulsing like veins. Some dreamt of standing inside them, touching walls that responded with warmth. Others saw symbols etched into those walls, circular patterns that spun slowly like gears waiting to be understood. No two dreams were the same, yet somehow every detail connected. One, woman Ida from the post office, said she woke with a metallic taste in her mouth and a word in her head she didn't recognize, Eludan. She wrote it down. Others saw it too, later carved into tree bark, in condensation on mirrors, once even drawn by a toddler in spilled cereal. And then the compass needles stopped behaving. One morning, a hiker reported that his compass spun for a full minute before freezing, not pointing north, but straight toward the center of town. The town square's statue, an old civil war monument, became the hum's focal point. People began gathering there just to listen. Not talk, just listen. The closer they stood, the more vivid their dreams became that night. One teen claimed he saw the sky unfold like fabric in his sleep stars, blinking in patterns like Morse code. They're trying to tell us something, he muttered the next day, scribbling notes into a spiral. Notebook he never let out of sight. Old Mr. Jenkins, the mayor, tried bringing in scientists. A team from the state university arrived, with seismographs, EMF readers, thermal scanners, all the tools that make people feel like answers are coming. But they left a week later, baffled and silent. One whispered to a resident on his way out, "It's like the town is sitting on something, but it's not. Man-made. And it's not dead." That night, every light in Elridge flickered at exactly 3:07 a.m. radios, played a single tone for 13 seconds. And from the hills, people reported seeing faint pulses of blue, not beams, not flashes, just a soft pulse, like the heartbeat of the earth. The hum had grown louder. The hum grew louder, more tangible as the weeks passed. At night, it filled the town like a secret lullaby. Its vibration felt deep in the chest, low and steady, like the pulse of a sleeping giant. It wasn't unsettling, not entirely. There was something oddly comforting about it, like it was meant to be there, part of the town's natural rhythm. But still, there was a growing unease among the people of Elridge. Something about the hum and those strange shared dreams made them feel as though they were standing on the edge of something vast, something unknowable. On the 3rd Tuesday of the month, the hum stopped. No gradual fade. No warning. It simply disappeared. The change was instant. The stillness that followed was deafening. For a few moments, people stared at each other, unsure of what to make of it. It was as if the town collectively held its breath, waiting for the hum to return. But it never did. In its absence, the night felt too quiet, too empty. For the first time in months, the townsfolk realized just how much they had become accustomed to the Sound. How it had woven itself into the very fabric of the days. The very next morning, as the sun broke over the horizon, something remarkable happened. The skies above Elridge, which had always been an ordinary pale blue, took on an unusual hue, a deep, almost violet shade. For the briefest moment, the sun's rays didn't cast long shadows, but instead seemed to bend and dance across the landscape. The light itself shimmered, almost as if it were alive. And from that shimmer came a low vibration, not a hum this time, but a pulse, like the thumping of a distant heartbeat. It was Ida, the same woman who had first dreamt of the word Eludan, who saw it first. Standing by her garden, she gazed up at the violet sky, feeling a strange pressure in her chest, as though she were being drawn into the very air itself. She couldn't explain why, but the word Eludan popped into her head again. Only this time, it felt different. It wasn't a foreign word anymore. It felt like something she already knew, something she had always known. Her breath quickened, and her hands shook. The ground beneath her feet felt strangely light, as if gravity had lost its grip on her. Before she could make sense of it, a neighbor rushed over, shouting for help. "It's happening, the lights! Come quick!" The two women hurried to the town square, where a small crowd had gathered. The town's old monument, the same one that had become a focal point of the hum, was now bathed in an unearthly glow. Blue, silver, and gold lights swirled around it, slowly rising from the ground, as if being pulled from the earth itself. The crowd gasped, some stepping back in fear, others in awe. No one dared to speak at first. It was as if the lights were communicating in some way, a language too subtle for human ears, but too powerful to ignore. The pulses were rhythmic, steady, like a heartbeat, the same pulsing sensation the townspeople had felt during the hum. Only now, it was more direct. It wasn't just a hum. It was as if the monument itself were alive. As the crowd watched in silence, the lights converged above the monument and formed a shape, a spiral, twisting upward like smoke rising from a fire. The spiral grew larger, spinning faster, until it expanded into a glowing disk in the sky. And for the briefest moment, the town stood bathed in its light, everything around them glowing in hues of blue and gold, as if the entire world had shifted. And then, as quickly as it appeared, the disk vanished, leaving only the blue lights gently fading into the atmosphere. The hum returned. But it wasn't the same hum. It was quieter now, less persistent. And yet, somehow it felt more intimate, like it was no longer just a sound carried on the wind, but something embedded in the town itself, in its very heartbeat. The people of Elridge knew, without saying a word, that something had changed. The hum, the lights, the visions. They were all pieces of something much bigger, something that had been slowly unfolding around them. They didn't know how long it had been happening. They didn't know what it meant, but they all felt it. The rest of the town's population seemed to change, too. Everyone moved a little slower, their eyes a little more distant, as though they were all waking from a long collective dream. There was an undeniable sense of unity now, as if the hum had somehow bridged a gap between them all, creating an unspoken bond that couldn't be broken. For a moment, Elridge felt connected not just to each other, but to something beyond the sky, beyond the stars, something vast, ancient, and incredibly patient. Days passed. Life resumed in the town, but with a subtle difference. People would look up at the sky more often, as though expecting something to happen. And when it did, when the hum returned in the quietest hours of the night, and the lights flickered, in the distant hills, they no longer felt alone. They knew, somewhere deep inside, that they were being watched, but not in the way they feared. Not with malice, but with interest. A gentle presence that had always been there, quietly waiting. It was a soft, moonless night in early autumn when Elaine first heard the voice. A voice that didn't echo through her ears, but rather slipped straight into her thoughts like a whisper behind her eyes. She had been lying in bed, curled under the familiar weight of her grandmother's quilt, the ticking of the hallway clock offering the only sense of time in the stillness. Everything was normal, utterly ordinary, until the voice came, quiet and clear, saying just 3 words: go outside, now. It didn't sound human, not quite, but neither did it feel wrong or frightening. It was like being gently nudged by a force that understood her better than she understood herself. Elaine blinked, unsure if she was dreaming, but something in her gut, the calm pull of intuition, told her this was real. She slid out of bed, her bare feet touching the cool wooden floor. The house was dark and silent, her parents asleep, the dog not even stirring in its usual spot at the foot of the stairs. The voice repeated, softer this time, almost kindly, go outside. So she did, through the kitchen, unlocking the sliding glass door that led to the backyard, where nothing waited but silence and the distant glow of street lamps. But as she stepped onto the dew-damp grass, something changed. The air felt heavier, not oppressive, more like charged, like the moment before lightning splits a storm. Then came the glow, not from above, but from the edge of the woods, behind her house, a soft, pulsing red light, too steady to be fire, too low to be any aircraft. It hovered just above the tree line, breathing in slow rhythm. She should have run, but she couldn't. Her body stood calmly still. Yet inside her, everything felt seen. Not in a violating way, but in a deep, reverent sort of knowing, like whoever or whatever was there already understood her life, her sadness, her secrets. The red light grew closer, the hum in the air rising in gentle pitch, not sharp or loud, but like a lullaby made from the breath of stars. Then, without warning, the light blinked out, gone. No sound, no breeze, just Elaine, standing barefoot in her backyard, the scent of earth and night thick in her lungs, feeling like a page had just been turned inside her soul. She returned to bed quietly as if nothing had happened. But the next morning, she awoke with a smear of red clay on her foot, and their backyard didn't have any red soil. She checked, again and again. Even years later, that strange voice would sometimes echo in her mind, just as she drifted to sleep, never commanding, just calling, as though the invitation wasn't over. That morning, as golden sunlight seeped through her window blinds, Elaine sat at the edge of her bed with the weight of something, unspoken, resting on her shoulders. The memory of the red light wasn't fuzzy like a dream. It was too vivid, too real. Her feet still felt the cool press of that strange soil, and her skin held the trace of a warmth that hadn't come from the air. She tiptoed outside again, half hoping to see a sign, a leftover shimmer, anything. But the yard looked just like it always did. No scorch marks, no footprints, no red clay, nothing to tell her she hadn't imagined the whole thing. And yet, when she looked up at the woods where the light had hovered, she saw something different. The trees didn't look changed, but they felt quieter, as if holding their breath. Days passed. She didn't tell her parents. What could she say? But a voice in her head led her outside to watch a silent, glowing light float through. The trees like a thinking thing. But she hadn't been afraid, only awestruck. Every night she waited, hoping in secret for the voice to return. And it did. 7 days later, just after midnight, it came again. Soft, knowing. Elaine, come outside. This time she didn't hesitate. She was already wearing socks. As she stepped into the yard, the world felt suspended again, like she had entered a place, only visible between the seconds of a clock's tick. The trees were dark silhouettes, but something, some presence, made the stars above them seem closer. The voice didn't speak further, but her body seemed drawn, like her legs were moving with borrowed calm. She walked toward the trees, down the slight slope behind the garden, past the rusted swing that hadn't worked in years. As she stepped beneath the canopy, the air shifted, cooler, wetter, but not uncomfortable. She saw the glow again, not red this time, but a faint silver blue, like moonlight, turned liquid. It hovered low, drifting among the trees with unhurried grace. And then, she wasn't sure when, it was suddenly right beside her, close, breathing. Not a ship, not a person, but something in between. Her presence. The light seemed to see her without eyes, know her without asking. She felt her memories stir, not big ones, but small, forgotten moments. Her 5th birthday cake, a lost bracelet, her mother brushing her hair while humming out of tune. It was like the presence was sifting gently through her life, not to harm, just to understand. Then came the hum, low, melodic, as if the forest had begun to sing. The light rippled and changed shape, expanding like fog, surrounding her in soft warmth. She felt no fear, just connection. Deep, quiet, wordless connection. Time bent in that space. One blink and hours may have passed. When she opened her eyes again, she was back in bed. No footsteps in the hallway. No noise. But outside, the stars pulsed brighter, and her mind felt wider, like a door had been left ajar inside her. That night changed her forever. She began drawing strange symbols she didn't understand. Her dreams turned vivid, packed with sounds she'd never heard, and colors she didn't have names for. And that voice, the gentle one, would return only rarely now, but always with purpose. Sometimes just to say, "You're not alone." Sometimes to ask, "Are you ready?" Ready for what she didn't know. But she always answered yes, because deep down, even through the silence, she knew. Something out there had chosen her. And it wasn't finished yet. Elaine's days continued in quiet loops, but her nights bloomed with new patterns, dreams layered like translucent fabric, stitched with echoes of the silver blue light and that peaceful hum. At school, her friends noticed she had grown quieter, more thoughtful. She wasn't withdrawn exactly, but her gaze sometimes drifted to places no one else could see. She'd sit by the window during math class and trace the clouds with her eyes, like she was reading something just beyond them. One night she awoke with her heart pounding, not from fear, but from anticipation. There was no voice this time, yet she knew it was time to go outside. The stars above were unusually crisp, and the air carried a scent like rain on warm metal. She stepped outside and noticed the woods were glowing faintly again, but it wasn't coming from the same direction as before. This light flickered with color, blue, then violet, then green. And it wasn't hovering, but spiraling slowly like a leaf caught in an invisible whirl. She followed it. Her bare feet barely made a sound on the damp grass. The wind rustled leaves, but everything else stayed hushed, reverent. As she passed through a thin veil of mist, she found herself in a clearing she'd never seen before, though she'd lived beside these woods her entire life. It was circular, almost too perfect, the trees curving around like a natural amphitheater. In the center, the spiraling light had landed or become a shape, vaguely humanoid but fluid. It shimmered like it was made of fabric woven from stars. Elaine stood still, not out of fear, but deep respect. The presence regarded her in silence. Then, for the first time, it moved, raising what might have been an arm. A flicker of light passed from its hand to the air before her, and suddenly dozens of tiny orbs floated up like fireflies, each one carrying an image inside it. They were moments, some hers, like her drawing on the kitchen floor at age 6. Some weren't, children playing in, Snow she'd never seen. A mountain range under two suns. A creature resembling a deer but with translucent skin. The orbs moved, gently forming a circle around her. Then she heard a single word. Not in her ears, but in her bones. Remember. The orbs pulsed, once, then scattered into the trees, vanishing into the forest night. Elaine stood alone again in the clearing. Except now the hum returned, deeper this time, layered like 1,000 voices whispering the same lullaby. Her fingers tingled, as if they held electricity, and her heartbeat slowed into perfect rhythm with the sound. And then she awoke, not in her bed, but gently curled up, on the grass at the edge of her backyard. The morning sun was just beginning to tint the sky, and dew clung to her sleeves. She wasn't cold. She wasn't confused. She felt whole. Inside her head, images lingered, some from her own life, others alien and strange but comfortingly familiar. She got up, brushed herself off, and looked toward the woods. The mist was gone. The light, too. But her heart carried something that wasn't there before. In the days that followed, she began to sense the presence of others, like her. Not aliens, people. At the grocery store, in a quiet library aisle, or across a crowded park. She'd lock eyes with a stranger and know. A spark of recognition. A nod, no words needed. As if they, too, had heard a voice in the night once, and followed it. Elaine started keeping a journal, not of what had happened, but of what she felt. Each entry began with a date and a phrase. I heard the stars whisper again today. Her drawings became more intricate. Spirals, geometric patterns, beings with soft, glowing edges. She wasn't sure if they were memories or messages. All she knew was that every time she put pen to paper, her fingers moved like they remembered something her mind didn't. Years later, she'd find that other people across the world had drawn almost identical shapes. From Australia to Argentina, from Norway to Japan. People who'd never met and never spoken, but who all had stories of strange lights, missing time, and voices that said, go outside. And they had gone. Just like Elaine. Elaine's life quietly reshaped itself around that night, like a river bending around a stone too sacred to disturb. She never spoke of it to her parents, though she sensed they'd noticed something was different. Her mother began leaving her tea without asking, and her father looked at her a little longer before saying goodnight. Perhaps they remembered something from their own childhoods. Elaine often wondered if, long ago, they too had stepped outside on a whisper and forgotten the rest. As months passed, her connection to the light didn't fade. It deepened. It wasn't just the voice or the orbs or the being in the clearing. It was the knowing that stayed with her. A gentle certainty in her chest that she was part of something vast and ancient and quiet. She began walking different paths, through the woods, routes she didn't choose consciously but found herself pulled toward. There she would find odd little things. A stone that shimmered with a metallic sheen, a feather that shifted color depending on the angle, or small, impossibly symmetrical, patterns pressed into the dirt like stamps from another language. Some she brought home and hid in a box under her bed. Others she left where they were, feeling they belonged to the forest. Her dreams became brighter, too. She started seeing places not from Earth, towering crystal arches, oceans with 3 moons, trees whose leaves pulsed like hearts. Sometimes she was in these places, not as herself, but as something lighter, not floating, not flying, becoming. Each morning after these dreams, her thoughts were clearer. She no longer feared the unknown. Instead, she missed it. There was a soft homesickness for a place she couldn't name. Eventually, her art caught attention. A local gallery asked to show her sketches. Adults came, stared at her spiral drawings and shimmering dreamscapes, and left puzzled but moved. One man in a dark green coat approached her afterward. He didn't give. A name only said, "I've seen this before," tapping a page that showed a glowing doorway between trees. "But I didn't draw it. Thank you." And he left. Elaine didn't ask questions. She just nodded. The voice never returned. Not like that first night. But it had left something behind. Not just in her, but in the world around her. Once, as she sat under the same stars where it all began, she noticed a strange hush fall over the trees. Not fear, but pause, like the world was holding its breath. A shimmer passed through the air, like a ripple like heat on pavement. And for a second, she saw a figure standing at the edge of the forest, tall, faintly luminous, with eyes like distant galaxies. It didn't speak. It only lifted one hand, and though her heart thundered, she didn't look away. The gesture wasn't a warning. It was a greeting, a reminder. We are still here. You are still seen. Then, as softly as it had arrived, the figure vanished. The world exhaled. Crickets resumed their song, and Elaine smiled. There was no need for fear, no need for proof, just a deep understanding that the universe had touched her once and had never really let go. And somewhere, out in the vast dark quilt of stars above her, something else, something gentle and curious, was still listening. They had only been married a year. Ben and Rachel, both teachers, had taken a weekend trip to a quiet cabin near the Smoky Mountains, far from cell service and city noise. They wanted stillness, stars, and the smell of pine in the morning. That Friday night, after a slow dinner by the fireplace and a long conversation about nothing in particular, they crawled into bed, wrapped in the kind of silence that only exists in the deep woods. Sometime past midnight, Rachel stirred first. Not from a sound, but from a strange pressure in her chest, as if the room itself had grown heavier. She blinked and turned towards Ben, but he was already awake, eyes wide open, staring straight up, unmoving. Before she could speak, the light began. It wasn't coming from a lamp or the moon, but from nowhere, just a soft white glow that filled the room like fog. They both sat up slowly, still silent, like their voices had been left somewhere behind, and they noticed they were still in bed, or rather their bodies were, below them, perfectly still, breathing, sleeping. Ben turned to Rachel, and she looked back at him with the same stunned calm. They were standing beside the bed, but hadn't gotten up. Their hands didn't feel like hands anymore. They felt like outlines of warmth, the idea of fingers and skin, but nothing solid. Their feet didn't touch the floor. Not really. The room felt thinner somehow, like a stage set that could fall away with a breath. And then came the hum. Not loud, not mechanical. It was almost like a thought with a melody. Familiar but unplaceable. It passed through them rather than around them. And with it, something else arrived. Through the window, beyond the trees. A shape hovered in the sky, oval, silent, rimmed in soft blue light. It made no sound, no movement, but they both knew it had something to do with what was happening. Then came the shift, Rachel's eyes fixed on the door, where something was now moving. Not walking, gliding. 3 figures, maybe 4, no taller than a child, but slender, not human. They wore no clothes, had no visible features save for long heads and large, dark, blinking eyes. Ben wanted to move, to react, to scream or hide, but couldn't. He wasn't afraid. He just was, frozen in something that wasn't fear, but inevitability. The beings didn't speak. They simply observed. Moved closer to the bed. Their bed, where the real Ben and Rachel lay asleep, unaware. One of the beings raised a hand with long, thin fingers and held it over Rachel's sleeping body. A gentle pulse of light flowed from its hand, bathing her in a dim glow. Then the light faded. The hum softened. And slowly the beings turned and floated back out the door, vanishing into the brightness beyond the window.
Everything faded. Light, hum. Even the air itself. Rachel and Ben blinked, and they were suddenly back in bed, fully awake. Now, the glow gone, the hum gone, just the wind in the trees and the pounding of their hearts. Ben sat up, staring at his hands like they were unfamiliar. Rachel whispered, "Did you?" And he nodded before she finished. They didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, they found no evidence, no footprints, no lights, no strange sounds. Only one thing had changed. Rachel's necklace, a small locket she always wore to bed, was gone. They searched the cabin, their bags, the car. Nothing. 2 weeks later, it reappeared, resting neatly on the windowsill of their apartment in the city, glinting in the sunlight. Neither of them had put it there. That moment sealed the truth for them. They never told anyone. Not really. Just each other, in whispered moments on sleepless nights. But every now and then, especially in places where silence runs deep, Rachel would look out the window, and Ben would gently reach for her hand. And without saying a word, they'd remember. They had seen themselves asleep, and something else had. Seen them, too. The weeks that followed were quiet, but never the same. Ben began waking up at 3:33 a.m. without reason, always with the sense that something had just left the room. Rachel started journaling, something she hadn't done since college, noting fragments of dreams that didn't feel like her own. Sometimes she'd write things she couldn't remember thinking, symbols she didn't recognize, lines of looping script that made her uneasy and yet familiar. One evening, while cleaning out a kitchen drawer, they found a Polaroid, camera neither remembered buying, along with a pack of unused film. Out of curiosity, Rachel snapped a picture of the living room. When the photo developed, the room looked normal, except for a thin streak of light, like a slash of moonbeam, running vertically beside the couch. They tried again. Different angle, same light, always in the same place, but only in photos, never visible to the naked eye. A few days later, they decided to spend another weekend in the same cabin. They told themselves it was just for closure, to feel normal there again. But deep down, they both wanted answers. The cabin hadn't changed. Still cozy, still creaky, still smelling, faintly of pine and old wood smoke. But as the sun dipped behind the trees, the silence settled deeper than before, like the air was, listening. They lay in bed that night, facing each other in the dark, not speaking, just holding hands and waiting. And then, almost exactly at 1:11 a.m., the glow returned. Softer this time, like moonlight reflected through fog, but it was unmistakable. Rachel sat up, first, then Ben. Their bodies felt heavy, but not pinned. This time, they moved, slowly, cautiously, toward the window. And there, it was again, just above the treetops, the shape, the light, perfectly still, watching. They didn't float this time. They didn't separate from themselves. But the hum returned, not as loud, but just as deep, like the earth itself was vibrating beneath them. Then Rachel felt it. A wordless invitation. Not a voice, not a command, just a knowing. Go outside. She looked at Ben, and he nodded, as if he'd heard it too. They slipped on their coats, stepped outside, barefoot, into the dew-drenched grass, and stood silently beneath the pale sky. The object above them didn't move, didn't pulse, didn't beam down, but its presence was undeniable. Rachel felt something behind her eyes, a pressure, a flicker, and suddenly she wasn't in the clearing anymore. She was standing in a vast room, seamless, borderless, lit from nowhere and everywhere, and across from her, Ben, wide-eyed, breathing like he'd just surfaced from underwater. Between them hovered a small silver sphere, spinning gently. It emitted no sound, no heat, just a strange sensation like it was looking through her. Then, as quickly as it began, it ended. They blinked, and they were back in the yard. The cabin lights flickered. A fox cried out in the distance. Above them the sky was empty, stars only. No hum, no glow. They didn't speak for a long time, just held each other under the open sky. When they returned home the next day, the air in their apartment felt different. Not ominous. Just watch. Ben's students noticed he started drawing strange shapes in the margins of his handouts. Rachel, without realizing, had begun humming the same tune every morning. A soft, four-note melody she couldn't place. A melody she swore she heard in the hum. They tried to live normally, go to work, watch movies, do groceries. But they both knew, deep down, something fundamental had shifted. They hadn't been visited. They hadn't been chosen. They had been invited. And they had accepted. Not in words, but in presence. In silence. And once you've crossed that threshold, seen yourself sleeping from outside your own body, seen the watchers watch you, normal becomes something you remember, not something you return to. The world hadn't changed. But their place in it had. And some nights, when sleep wouldn't come, Ben would find Rachel standing by the window again, eyes scanning the sky. She never said what she was hoping to see, and he never asked. And so time began to stretch differently for them, not just in hours or days, but in feeling. The world carried on with its usual clatter, alarm clocks, traffic, coffee shops, meetings. But for Rachel and Ben, everything felt just slightly shifted. It was as if they'd stepped half a foot outside the stream everyone else was still swimming in. The days felt dimmer. Conversations around them seemed to echo. Sometimes they'd glance at clocks and swear they had just looked a moment ago, only to see that 2 hours had vanished. Rachel stopped wearing her watch entirely. It didn't seem to keep the right time anymore, always running a few minutes behind or ahead. Never right. One night, as they lay in bed, they found themselves recounting old memories, testing each other's recollection. But every so often they'd hit a wall, something one remembered clearly, and the other didn't at all. The trip to the zoo in 2018. The night Ben twisted his ankle in the snow. A birthday party for Rachel's sister. In each case, one memory existed vividly for one of them, while the other was blank. No trace. As if they'd lived in slightly different versions of the same story. That dissonance became more frequent, more persistent, and it unsettled them in a way they couldn't quite explain. Not fear exactly, but an unease that built up like static before a storm. Then came the day Rachel was riding the subway, earbuds in, staring at nothing, when her music cut out and was replaced by what sounded like a voice, but not in English. Not in any language she recognized. It lasted only 5 seconds, long enough to raise goosebumps on her arms. When she looked down at her phone, the song had never skipped. She later asked Ben if he'd experienced anything strange recently, and he quietly admitted that he'd been hearing a quiet tone, like a tuning fork whenever he entered their apartment, but only in the hallway, and only at night. One weekend, while dusting off old books from a forgotten shelf, Rachel found a sketchbook filled with drawings neither of them remembered creating. Shapes, complex patterns, geometric spirals that seemed to flow from page to page like some slow-moving code. On the last page was a small note in Rachel's handwriting. If they come again, don't resist. It only hurts when you fight it. She couldn't remember writing that. She couldn't even imagine herself thinking it. The next day, Ben installed a motion camera in their bedroom. It was a quiet decision. Neither of them talked about it, but both knew why it was going up. The first few nights, nothing, just restless tossing and turning. But on the 5th night, the footage was different. At exactly 3:34 a.m., the video showed the room flickering, as if a shutter were blinking open and closed.
but there was no sound. Then for 2 full minutes, the camera recorded an empty bed. Completely empty. Rachel and Ben, gone. Then the flicker again. And suddenly, there they were, lying exactly as before. The timestamp never skipped. It was a continuous feed. And yet for 2 full minutes, they had disappeared. The next morning, Ben downloaded the footage and played it frame by frame. In one single frame, barely noticeable unless paused at the exact right moment, he spotted something. A reflection in the mirror across from the bed. A figure, tall, pale, featureless, watching. It was gone in the next frame. Neither of them said anything. They just sat, holding each other's hands so tightly their knuckles turned white. That night, Rachel dreamed of a place she'd never seen, felt familiar with. A vast hallway, white and seamless, curving endlessly, lined with doors. Behind each door was a version of herself, one reading, one painting, one screaming, one staring blankly. She tried to open one, but it wouldn't budge. Then a voice, not outside her, but through her, said, "You are becoming. Let go of what you were." She awoke, drenched in sweat. Ben sat upright beside her, already awake, staring at her with wide eyes. "I had the exact same dream," he whispered. The days after that grew quieter. Not peaceful, just still. Like the moment before something breaks. The camera never recorded anything again, but every morning, Ben and Rachel felt more disconnected from the world they had once been a part of. It wasn't depression. It wasn't detachment. It was like being tuned to a different frequency. Friends started to notice. "You two look different," one co-worker said. "Not bad, just thinner or lighter." But neither of them had lost weight. Their reflections seemed normal. Their shadows didn't. They began to hear soft noises at night. Not footsteps, not voices, just the soft rustling of something. Unseen, brushing past the curtains or shifting weight across the floorboards. Once they followed the sound into the hallway, only to find the word "again" scratched faintly into the wall beneath a painting. Neither remembered it being there before. Neither remembered hanging the painting. Ben stopped going to work. He said it felt strange trying to teach things he no longer believed. Rachel quit her job the week after, saying she couldn't look at a spreadsheet without seeing shapes behind the numbers. On a cold Tuesday morning, Rachel found a scar on her side she didn't remember getting. Small, crescent-shaped, like a healed incision. When she showed Ben, he pulled up his shirt and revealed the same mark on his ribs. Same shape, same spot. Neither of them felt panic. They felt resolved, like something had been decided without them. That night, for the first time since it began, they both stood outside under the stars and waited. Nothing came. No glow, no sound, just silence. But the air was warm, despite the season. Their bodies felt light, like they could lift off if they only leaned back far enough. Rachel closed her eyes and whispered, "We're still here." Ben looked up and said, "But maybe not for long." In the weeks that followed, Rachel and Ben began documenting their lives, not with the intention to prove anything, but to remember. Journals filled up quickly. Rachel would write in spirals, tracing words in slow circles from the center of the page, outward. Ben recorded audio memos, but when he played them back, there were always strange gaps, whole chunks of time where the audio would be perfectly silent, yet the timestamp showed no pause. In one clip, faint breathing could be heard that didn't match his own rhythm. They stopped trying to make sense of it. Logic had become a leaky boat in a storm they could no longer chart. Strangely, though, they felt more at peace. The tension that had once wrapped around them like tight string began to loosen. Some mornings, they woke up with no memory of the night before. only the comfort of knowing they had held hands while asleep. Their dreams became gentler, less frantic. Sometimes they'd dream together and remember the same details upon waking, walking barefoot through shallow water that glowed like starlight, or dancing beneath a sky that pulsed with violet clouds and humming tones. One night, they returned home to find the front door ajar. Nothing stolen, nothing broken, but every mirror in the house had been turned to face the wall. When Rachel finally flipped one back around, her reflection blinked a half-second later than she did. She didn't scream. She just nodded. "I think we're being prepared," she told Ben quietly, like something's guiding us, softening us. He nodded back, not afraid, but solemn. The next morning, the scar on Rachel's ribs was gone. So was Ben's. In their place were faint marks, 3 dots, arranged in a triangle. They didn't hurt. They felt like birthmarks. They tried to talk about it less. After that, words only tangled the knowing. Instead, they spent more time outside, barefoot in the yard, listening to the silence, between the birdsong and the breeze. They could almost hear the hush of another world overlapping this one, like pages of a book, held too tightly together. Some days they found small, polished stones left on the windowsills, smooth and warm to the touch, though it hadn't been sunny. On others, they would glance at the night sky and see stars they didn't recognize. Too large, too close. Ben once pointed at one and whispered, "That wasn't there last night." Rachel answered, "Neither were we." Eventually, they stopped checking the footage. The camera blinked red in the corner, faithfully recording. But they no longer needed the validation. What mattered wasn't catching proof. What mattered was the feeling they carried every day now, that their lives, while still grounded in this world, belonged to something larger, something unfolding, something that had always been there, just out of frame. One last night, they sat on the porch, fingers intertwined, stars wheeling overhead. No craft appeared. No hum filled the air. But as they stared out across the dark fields beyond their home, they both felt it. A shift. A quiet alignment. As if whatever presence had been watching was now satisfied. Rachel leaned her head against Ben's shoulder. "Do you think we're done?" she asked. Not with fear, but with quiet curiosity. Ben stared into the dark, eyes soft. "No," he said. "I think we've only just begun." A soft breeze rolled through the grass like a whisper. Somewhere far off, a fox called into the night. And in that calm, between the wind and the stars, the couple sat still, listening, not to the silence, but to what waited behind it. The camera inside their room kept blinking, quiet, watching, patient, recording the lives of 2 souls who no longer questioned why they were being watched, only what came next. And just like that, the cabin was gone. Not with a roar, not with a rumble, not even with the whisper of leaves brushing past. It simply wasn't there anymore. One moment, it stood as if it had always existed. Timbered walls breathing in the cold morning mist. Chimney leaning slightly as if tired from centuries of watching. And the next, only the clearing remained. Undisturbed grass. No footprint. No indentation where the porch had been. Not even a single splinter of wood or a forgotten nail glinting in the morning dew. Just space. Empty. Pristine. As though it had all been an illusion. But John knew what he'd seen. Felt. Heard. That humming. That impossible warmth. The gentle rustle from within like someone. Or something breathing quietly behind the walls. That odd sensation of being watched, but not in a way that made his skin crawl. More like being observed by an old friend, like a forest guardian peeking through the veil of time, reaching out to say, "You're not alone here." And though the cabin had disappeared, its impression lingered. In his mind, in his chest, in the air, that little clearing on the edge of the woods, once just another curve in a trail he'd walked for years, would never feel quite the same again, and neither would he, because there are some moments, quiet, fleeting, strange, that leave fingerprints deeper than any. Storm or scar, the kind of moments that echo. It wasn't just the vanishing structure, nor the smell of pine layered with something oddly metallic. It wasn't even the light, that golden wash that had no source, and yet illuminated everything with perfect clarity. No, it was what the cabin felt like. Safe, but ancient. Still, but waiting. As if it had a purpose, and just for a moment, John had stumbled into its orbit. He'd told no one. Not yet. How do you explain a cabin that's no longer there? How do you put into words a presence you can't define? Friends would laugh. Or worse, they'd look at him like something had broken. And maybe it had. Maybe something had. Shifted. Cracked open quietly, like a door nudged ajar in the wind, revealing a hallway you never knew was there. But deep down, John didn't care if anyone believed him, because some truths aren't meant to be shouted. Some truths are meant to be felt, like the way the air changes before snowfall, or how the woods go quiet right before something important happens, or how sometimes when you're walking alone, you get the unshakable feeling that the trees are listening and remembering you. That was the feeling he carried now. It stayed with him long after he left the woods, long after he locked his front door and made a pot of tea he forgot to drink. It stayed with him even as he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the occasional creak of the house settle into its own kind of slumber. And as his eyes grew heavy, as the edge of sleep began to pull him under, John thought about the cabin. Not just its appearance or the strange warmth of its doorway, but why it had shown itself, and why it had vanished. Maybe it had been a mistake, a glitch in the world's code, a veil pulled back for just a moment too long. Or maybe it had been intentional. Maybe it had appeared just for him, to remind him that there is still mystery in the world, that wonder is not extinct, that no matter how well we map the stars or pave the earth, there are still places and moments where the rules bend, where the world exhales, secrets not meant to be decoded, but experienced. Moments that make you stop, breathe, feel small in the best possible way. Because the truth is, we spend most of our lives surrounded by the ordinary. Morning routines, deadlines, grocery lists, but every now and then the curtain lifts, and we catch a glimpse of something other, something that doesn't make sense and doesn't need to. Something that whispers, there's more. And those moments, they change you. Maybe not in ways others can see. You'll still go to work, water the plants, make small talk about the weather. But inside, something shifts. A seed is planted, the kind that doesn't need light or time, just remembrance. And years later, when you walk by a certain stretch of forest or hear a hum that doesn't quite belong, that seed will stir, and you'll remember, not every detail, but the feeling, the awe, the stillness, the strangeness that somehow felt like home. So maybe the cabin wasn't meant to stay. Maybe its very purpose was its ephemerality here and gone like a breath on a mirror, like a memory you can't place, but miss all the same. John doesn't go looking for it again, not exactly, but he does walk slower now. He listens more closely to the wind. He lets the silence stretch just a little longer.